You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارشتايجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
I don't care what anyone says, Kevin. The Fat Dragon, Melong, will win ping pong gold in Rio. I don't care how good J.K. Jong has been over the last little while, but oh wait, that's for tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah, it starts like we're close. We're very close, Dwayne, but we still have a little ways to go. But tonight we are doing an extravaganza or Master Theater 3000 type of mystery theater type of event during the opening ceremony of the Olympics. So if you are an Olympic freak, we invite you to join us tonight on the same channel that you are listening to us right now.
I think Kevin's a little too young to remember Mystery Science Theater 3000. But,
yeah, what was that? It was like a radio show, I guess.
No, it was on. It used to be on MTV, I believe, back in the day. I had MTV growing up.
What's MTV?
Yeah, exactly. You used to play music videos. Now it's
music videos. What are those?
What you watch on YouTube.
Okay. Oh, videos. Okay, yeah.
MTV is where you watch bad scripted television and scripted reality shows now, I believe. But yeah, Mystery Science Theater 3000 was a show which they would show bad old movies in the background, and they would just have these two little silhouettes in the corner. It was brilliantly simple, and they would just rip on the movies as they were going on. So the movie was played. You could watch the movie, but it was funnier to listen to the comments of these people that were making fun of what they were watching.
Well, we're definitely doing that tonight. I am going to laugh when Liechtenstein walks in the stadium. I'm going to rip their Lindenhausen for sure.
Yeah, and as I said, it'll be ambient here, so my household will be full. My better half will tell you at some point during the event that Andorra is not a real country. She truly believes that Andorra does not exist. Not because she doesn't know the world. She's just decided Andorra isn't a real country.
She decided it's like a fairy tale land.
Yes, and this, you can't make this stuff up. This is actually something, if you know her, that Elizabeth would say. So there you go. Today, this is Soccer Today, though, and we'll put the Olympics a little bit on the side burner just for a few minutes anyway to talk about some of the issues that are going on in the world of soccer. Today, the playoff draw was for the Champions League was drawn. We're going to really, I think, deal with that next week, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Dwayne.
Yes.
Let's just say that it hit the fan in the last 24 hours in Rayo OKC. The coach has stepped down, and literally, basically, the entire front offices, except 2 employees, the last reports that we have seen, have left the ship. Quite interesting stuff going on in Oklahoma.
Yeah, Alan Marcina, he basically 8 months after he took the job to be Rayo, and I got to get that out of the way because I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do it anymore. Rayo OKC, 8 months after he took the job, he decided to that he's not tenable anymore. And what we're hearing is that this really, it's one of those like jump or push or get pushed kind of situations. They had the situation laid out for them, how much money was being removed from this franchise. Basically, the ownership group in Spain from Rayo has pulled most of the money, most of the funding. They're going bare bones the rest of the season. Players are going to have to share rooms on the road.
Players are going to have to move in together, basically, in Oklahoma as well. The apartments that were paid by the club, now they're going to have to size down, and that's never fun. So a lot of things are going on, and just one part of the story. There's other stories going on as well, Dwayne. In Edmonton land, FC Edmonton, there was a player in July that was released by the club, and lo and behold, now he was arrested for cocaine trafficking charges. That's what he faces. Sadi Jalali, a player that was with FC Edmonton and was released last month. But quite a story. You can read all about it on Steven Sandor's website, the11.ca.
Yeah, look, that one is a serious case, obviously. Don't know how he got involved with drug trafficking. You would hope that this isn't anything that's a problem out there, but nonetheless, we're not going to make fun of that or whatever. We'll put it out there. You want to read Stephen's story, you can get a little more insight on that. Not a good look for the NASL on a couple fronts, though, is the bottom line. And I think that that's really the story here. I mean, beyond the Rayo stuff, to get specific to that, it's can they last the year is a legitimate question at this point. And you just can't have if you're a league that is trying to make a claim that you are a Division I status league within the United States and Canada, you can't have teams folding in the middle of their season. You can't have teams starting in the middle of the season too. And we're talking about Puerto Rico here. But nonetheless, that's what we're facing. That I think that they'll probably find a way through this for the year by cutting these costs. But even said, it's very difficult to imagine Rayo remaining next year. And
it goes back to the idea of the club to start to begin with. Like, did Oklahoma City really want it? Not necessarily deserve, because you can always make the case that any city deserved anything. But did the city wanted a second soccer team? Would have had the energy already been established for a couple of seasons before Rayo appeared? They really want a second team. I don't know. It's all those answers are really quite. I've always been quite boggled by this team as a whole. And last season in the offseason, I had my reservation when a week and a half before the beginning of training camp, 3 players were signed by Rayo. So I had my doubts. They did change it, sign good players, but it never really fizzled into anything. And now with this, can you imagine the state of the locker room right now? Just on the pitch, what it's going to look like now? They were on first place, for God's sakes, in the NSL. What does it say about the league now? Because they're in first place. Wow.
I don't know how much longer they'll be in first place. I suspect that the second thing to fall, and this is probably some of these players will be moved out in the days ahead. There still is time in the window in much of the world. So I suspect that a lot of them will be moved out. It's kind of interesting that they waited till after the MLS window fell before they moved, because there might have been some value there. Not necessarily star value, but in terms of depth players that some MLS teams might have been interested in if they were released on a free. But that's not the case. But I suspect some of these guys will move out just for cost-saving reasons. And as I said, I can't see it moving on. I mean, in terms of why they did this, it comes down to the whole Division II, Division III kind of status stuff. And USL is considered Division III, and NASL is considered Division II right now. Although as these leagues continue to operate, it becomes increasingly more difficult to understand why that's not flipped, because the USL, bluntly said, folks, is more professional right now.
There's always exceptions, Wayne, on both sides. Some NASL team are really more professional than, let's use the Rayo OKC example right now, as they are right now. But some other situation isn't. In the USL, it's the same thing too. There's a difference between the top clubs and the smaller ones with the organization and everything. But on average, or median-wise, USL seems right now, at least in optics and perception, to have its thing together compared to the NSL, if you want to use that expression.
Yeah, well, the NASL has always been an outlaw. It's not an outlaw league, literally. Obviously, it's sanctioned, but it's an outlaw league in sort of attitude, right? That it wants to do things outside of the norm of the rest of the system. The USL has decided to cooperate with MLS, accept its status as being beneath that, and work to become the best second-tier league it can. It has an application to be considered Division II moving forward. I suspect it will probably win that application. The NASL fans, as you know, and I'm sort of stating this stuff for anyone who's new to us that isn't necessarily familiar with what we call the soccer wars right now. But this is what it comes down to. The NASL folks, because they're an outlaw attitude, they don't believe in single entity. They don't believe in what they would call corporate soccer. They don't believe in sort of the monopoly, they'd say, of Major League Soccer over the pyramid. They want an open system. Most of them are pro-rel advocates. I wouldn't say all, but many. They believe that there shouldn't be any restrictions on how teams operate. There shouldn't be central ownership of contracts. There shouldn't be central controls. And there are elements of that, obviously, Kevin, that I agree with. I would like to see MLS move away from central control. I would absolutely like to see MLS stop meddling in contract negotiations and to not own those contracts anymore. And I would hope that Major League Soccer also agrees that that is the way forward. But I think that there's other aspects of what Major League Soccer does that NASL does not, and we're seeing evidence of how this is problematic here. in terms of support and collectiveness that really do still need to be in the system in North America. As much as we inside the bubble like to think that the sport is on even and good terms, and it is in a lot of places, but across the board, it's in places like Oklahoma, it's not. They're going to struggle. They're not going to make a lot of money. And if they don't have the support, they don't have the ability of having other teams come in and help them and prop these guys up, then teams are just going to fall off. And the optics of that are terrible, Kevin.
Terrible, you say? Just go on social media and write Rayo OKC. Not for people, just in searching tweets. And what I have found last night was, yeah, this league's doing this once again. Another team that falls. One of my team. I love this team, and they're falling. They're gonna disappear very soon. I can tell. Those type of feelings, expression, sentiment was all over social media. It's a small sample size, you're going to say, of the actual supporters section probably of Rayo OKC. But how did that supporters section feel this morning? That's the question. Deflated, angry, wondering why they invested themselves time and money in the last 8-9 months in this club. Is it worth it? Those are the type of questions that's going on today. And no one should ever ask themselves that. It's just the ugly side of sports.
Yeah, and look, there's energy in the city that they can gravitate to, but a lot of them will probably resist that within Oklahoma City because
of the NASL versus USL battlefront. That was that, right? The battlefield.
Yeah, and it comes down to that disagreement with the structure. But I would challenge people that are on that side of the debate to ask themselves, what other league in the world do you worry about how the corporate structure is? You just worry about what the team in front of you is. And yes, you can abdicate and concern yourself and then be interested in that sort of stuff. But I don't understand. I never have understood how it should affect your day-to-day support of a team. I don't like aspects of Major League Soccer. I especially don't like aspects of Major League Soccer, how it relates to the Canadian system. But yet, because my community is represented by Toronto FC, I will go to Toronto FC games and I will enjoy myself. I will have sometimes a critical mind towards it. I will not agree with everything they do. I will not agree with that they are necessarily the best solution, 100% across the board for the Canadian system, but they're still my local team. So I don't understand why people are like so caught up in, I can't support MLS because I can't support some, or I can't support single entity or whatever. It's just ridiculous. If you love the sport, love the sport. But as you said, Kevin, there is that other side of this, is that there are people that emotionally invested in this expansion team, and they may have it pulled from them in less than a year. And what does that do moving forward to their ability to support the game on a local level? I would suspect that it means that they're going to go back to their HD TVs and not really leave their living room as they support the game. It'll be overseas, not here in North America.
And that's very sad, because one supporter's loss is one too many. There's enough room in this world for every soccer fan to find a way to find a team, to love them and to support them. And when that team is taken away from you, you feel a sentiment of void, of there's nothing you can do. You feel so vulnerable because of that situation. Look, and I tell everybody in Oklahoma that's feeling sad this morning because of the firing, some people got fired. Well, it started 24 hours before. Like, people got told aware of the situation. Like, you might be fired, or you might need to. Things are going to be happening. So then 24 hours happened, and people like Alan Mercina left. Some people in the front offices were fired. Some of them quit. With all that happening, if you're a supporter of that team, there's Oklahoma City Energy in your backyards. They have been well run. They have been competitive in their league in the beginning of the season, coached by Jimmy Nielsen, legend of Sporting Kansas City, the White Puma himself. Why don't you go support that team? They're in your neck of the woods. They're in your backyards. And hey, they have been there for a few seasons and they haven't folded yet.
No, I suspect there are some that support them both. I mean, the other side of the soccer wars is this belief of this resistance towards the quote unquote farm league model that USL has. Yeah, there are affiliate systems within that place, but I think there's lots of room within USL to be unique. If you want to put a team in there, you can do it in a unique way, and you can own your own contracts within the budgets that you can handle, and you can find your own level. And I believe increasingly that the right way forward for the pyramid is to have some level of merger between the stronger NASL teams to move into USL. When you see programs like Cincinnati drawing 20,000 people. There's room for big clubs. There's room for the New York Cosmos in USL within that format, and they can operate the exact same way they are now, just within that. And then what you do, in my mind, once this merger happens, is you create tiers of USL, and maybe even then your damn dream can come true, and you might have some room to move between those tiers, just not to the top one. So it'd be a half win, but nonetheless, a half win is a start, guys. That's my thought on that. All right, Kevin, let's take a longer break. We're going to get Jonathan Tannenwald on the line now to talk about the Philadelphia Union moves and a little bit of U.S. women's national team.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio.
It is
Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
It is a great pleasure that we welcome Jonathan Tannenwald to the show. Jonathan, how are you doing after a very busy week for you in Philadelphia?
Just a little busy, yeah, no kidding. Well.
Just a little.
All right,
By the way, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Are you breaking some news on this show that there are NASL owners who are willing to have their teams be relegated?
No, I'm not, but I am suggesting that would be a way that you could have their dream come true.
Okay, because from everything I've heard, there are NASL owners who, in fact, don't want their teams to be relegated, and that might be part of the problem.
Yeah, well, there you go. So the merger situation. I was thinking out loud, Jonathan, but I always find that a bit, ironic, I guess, that most of the NASL fans are not most, I should say, the loudest are the pro-rel advocates, but yet they're not the one that league itself is not willing to submit itself to relegation, which means that maybe MLS isn't the big bad baddie. What do you think of the Rayo stuff, quick, Jonathan, before we get into the main meat of our topic today?
I've been skeptical for a long time, and I think people know this, of the pitch that the NASL quite explicitly made to Europe to say, please come and run farm teams in the United States of America. We're happy to have you. That's not how I would want my soccer team to be treated if I had one, which I don't at this point, but even so, we saw it with Chivas USA. We saw it with New York City FC, although obviously there's a lot more money in that, and there is some amount of understanding, at least now, with City Football Group that insulting New York is not a good idea. Why is it such a bad thing to solicit investors within the United States and Canada for a healthy and sustainable second division, which we all want, even if some of us would rather that traffic sports not be involved in it?
Fair enough. Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Let's get to the meat of our topic today. So let's move up to the top level of Major League Soccer in the Philadelphia Union. A lot of big moves this week. Let's just get your general observation on what the Union are. They going all in on this season, Jonathan?
Sure seems that way, doesn't it? And for Union fans, I'm sure they're very happy that they are. It's been a while since we've really seen this kind of a push made by the team, and it among the many symbols is the fact that Alejandro Bedoya is going to be the first player in team history to draw $1 million salary. I really like the moves that they've made. I think Bedoya is going to do very well for the team if he's willing to play in sort of a deep-lying central role instead of the high playmaker. I have a hunch that he's going to be willing to do that, in part because of how much defense he played at the Copa America, even in the high playmaking role. He's a recognizable name. He's a player who the Union have been trying to sign for well over a year now. It's clear that he wants to be here. I think that's going to be great. I think the Charlie Davies signing is the right kind of backup striker for CJ Sapong, as Jim Curtin, the Union's coach, said yesterday. It will help not run CJ into the ground by the end of the year, which they're really going to need if they make the playoffs, and I think they're going to do it the way things are looking. And the funny thing is, you go looking, for a backup striker, which is tough to do if you want to find a really good one. Look, you can go to Europe or, the equivalent of Josie Altidore or something like that, or go find a big name foreigner who is going to come in at number one on the depth chart. It's going to be really clear. But if you want to go find a backup striker to a player like CJ Sapong, without annoying him too much, but also finding somebody who can spell you for 7 or 8 goals. Charlie Davies fits the bill pretty well. And I remember thinking when the Revs traded for Kai Kamara, they've got Kamara, they've got Agudelo. I think they still have Teal Bunbury. I don't know where he's gone. And I remember thinking, what about Charlie Davies? What does this do to him? Now, we didn't know at the time that he was in his cancer treatment because he didn't make that public until this past weekend. And obviously, things look very different now that we know. But even so, it's still a pretty clogged depth chart. And as Brian Bilello, the president of the Revolution, said on Twitter after the move was announced, this was not something that we were looking to do. This was presented to us. And I think it was pretty smart of Ernie Stewart to make that kind of move.
Jonathan, if we go back to about a bit more than a month ago, when Vincent Noguera and the Philadelphia Union decided to part ways, it laid the background to those moves right now. And the trading of Sébastien Letou, it really changed the core of this team. Those two players were, over the last 5 years almost, the core of the Union. How had that been perceived with the fan base of the Philadelphia Union?
Let me address Noguera first. Not all of the reasons for his departure have been made public because of requests by him. I think that's been made pretty clear at this point. I have said what I have been able to say publicly, which is that it was a personal health matter that he wanted to go back to France to get treatment for. And all of us in the Philadelphia media have respected his wish to keep the rest of it out of the public view. I think it is respecting his wish more than the team's wish. If it was the team's wish, I'm not always sure we'd have been so nice over the years, but the players' wish we're willing to respect. It's a big loss because he covered a lot of ground in a very literal sense on the field and also played a key role in that deep-lying box-to-box position. And I remember when he left, Kevin, you might remember this too. I thought Eric Alexander of Montreal would be the kind of guy they might want to go look for in the league to replace him. Mm-hmm. But I'd take Alejandro Bedoya over just about any of the alternatives within the league. They also signed Derek Jones out of their academy, who plays a similar position, but obviously is not quite ready yet to be a starter in Major League Soccer. Letou's an interesting one also in this way. They got rid of him once before, and the fans were extremely upset. In part because Letou was trying to negotiate a new contract year without an agent, which is never a good idea, unless you're somebody like Chris Wondolowski, who really has a strong personal relationship with your team's front office. Sébastien Letou did not. And so off he went to Vancouver and then to the Red Bulls after that. And then he came back here. And one of the reasons why he was brought back is because the front office of the Union at the time knew that it would make the fans very happy. Well, it did, but guess what? He hasn't been that good. I'd rather have Ilsinho on the field than Sébastien Letou. I'd rather have Alejandro Bedoya on the field than Sébastien Letou. And I think at this point, most of the Union fan base is comfortable with him going because they know he's not as good a player as he used to be. And they know that Major League Soccer has evolved over the last couple of years into a league where you want to have more technical and skilled players and not just the kind of straight line runner that Sébastien Letou is very good at being.
Now, we look at the standings. There's a small gap between NYCFC and the rest. Will those moves help Philadelphia? Are they clearly an upgrade? And are they a better team this week than they were at the same point last week?
They are absolutely a better team this week than they were last week. Alejandro Bedoya is worth it, for that and other reasons. And, he's going to get, I think the transfer fee was $1 million and the salary is going to be $1 million a year or so. Compare that to Michael Bradley, Jermaine Jones, Josie Altidore, his teammates on the national team, Clint Dempsey also, who, look, a player is worth whatever a team is willing to pay them. I certainly think that a lot of the U.S. national team stars are worth making big money in Major League Soccer. But Bedoya is making a salary that is very far off theirs when his talent level is not very far off theirs. So I think the Union have done some very good business here. I don't know what New York City FC is going to do the rest of this year. I think they've got a good chance to keep a hold of first place in the East. I think the Union will give them a run for their money. I think Montreal and Toronto will give them a run for their money. but it certainly helps the Union fortify a playoff place that will be high enough to at least guarantee them a home game, which would be top 4. I like what they're doing. And I think the East race threatens to be very interesting. And the great majority of the Union's games this year are against teams in the Eastern Conference. They've done terribly against the West, but they don't have to worry about that as much anymore. They've got to go out and beat the teams that they really need to beat now, starting with at DC United on Saturday.
It seems to me, Jonathan, the top 5 in the East right now are going to be the top 5 at the end of the year, and then there's going to be a little battle for New England and Orlando, and then the other 3 are sort of a lost cause at this point. I'm wondering, in terms of the Union, we saw a franchise that launched with a great deal of fanfare, a lot of support. The Sons of Ben were vocal, they're well known, almost drove that franchise, but it's soured a little bit in the years after. Not quite to a level that TFC did, but it was getting there. How would you describe the fan relation with the club now that there has been some change in the direction over the last year or so?
It's quite well. I'll get to that in a minute. The overarching point is that this is the difference between Ernie Stewart and Nick Sakevich, who I've ranted about many, many times over the years, as your listeners know. I don't need to rehash all of that. The Union's problem in terms of resonance in their market is that Philadelphia is such a competitive sports market, and the big 4 teams, the Eagles, the Phillies, the Flyers, and Kevin's beloved 76ers. Sorry, that's the Hardwood Radio Show, not this one. They're so entrenched here that it's been tough for the Union to break through. And the amazing thing is that the teams have been so bad the last couple of years that the Union really have had an opportunity and have not been able to take advantage of it. And all they had to do was win. They didn't have to sign a star. They just had to win. Well, the Sixers turn around, the Flyers getting better, the Phillies are getting better, the Eagles have started training camp now, and everybody's paying attention to them because they just crush everything on the Philadelphia sports scene, as they always do. And yet, the Phillies are sort of trailing off because everybody knew they weren't going to be great this year, and the Eagles are kind of blah. So the door once again cracks open for the Union to try to grab some attention if they can. They aren't home again until the 20th of August, I think, against TFC. By the way, Duane, I believe that is Jerry Dobson's farewell game.
There you go.
And I'm not going to be out of them. I'm going to be on vacation, which I'm annoyed about because I've never met the guy. Not that I'm annoyed to be on vacation. I just wish I could meet him at some point. They've got a shot here to do something. And I'm going to be very interested to see, as will a lot of people around the league, because I think everybody knows that Major League Soccer needs a strong team in Philadelphia to drive television ratings in the Eastern Conference that's really so far in the last year and a half or so, with Chicago so bad and New England not all that great and DC United struggling. They really need the Union, and the Union can give this league a big push.
Jonathan, when you look at the league-wide, the transfer market was really busy. Any other team that caught your attention with their move, and who would you rank got the best out of their transfer market opportunities? Who got better in the transfer market, in your opinion?
Well, I think the Union won the transfer window easily. I don't think there's much question about that. The other deal, the Fabian Castillo deal, everybody's just been talking about. The deal that fascinates me the most is Matias Perez Garcia going to Orlando and Darwin Seren going to San Jose. That might put San Jose in the playoffs, folks, because Darwin Seren is really, really good. One of the most underrated players in all of Major League Soccer. If I'm Real Salt Lake and the Whitecaps, I'm getting worried. Also, because Portland's going to make a run. Seattle, you would think, will make a run at some point. I think Portland will make the playoffs because they're too good. I'd like to think Vancouver will make the playoffs, but they got some work to do. Real Salt Lake has some work to do, and so does Kansas City. And we will see what Colorado does. Colorado is the wild card in everything in the Western Conference playoff race. Can they keep their success going? If they can, somebody's going to be on the outside looking in. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's going to be awfully interesting to see what the Rapids look like if they do hold their position and are able to host the final legs of some playoff series. They're going to have a pretty big and significant home advantage there, Jonathan. Okay, Kevin, if we could just key up. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Real quick. Isn't this more fun than knowing who the champion's going to be a month before the season ends?
Yeah, parity has some benefits for sure. I do like to have a little bit of dynasties as well, because I think they add something as well. So it's always the eternal
too,
debate.
but I'm an American and I like playoffs, and that's like not allowed as a soccer person,
I like playoffs too. I think it's ridiculous. People that want to go single entity, that would be if you want to kill ratings and attention for the sport, that'd be the quickest way to do it. You need a championship game in this part of the world. That's absolutely necessary, Jonathan. All right, Kevin, can you tee up a quick little break? We're going to come back. If Jonathan, can you hold the line, and we'll do U.S. women's national team and Olympic stuff to end our conversation with Jonathan.
Hey, it's Kevin of the Sports Podcasting Network. On SPN, on top of What's the Score, the Sports News Quiz, you can find a plethora of great sports podcasts. Hardwood Radio, Gridiron Radio, Sports, It's in the Game, Scuderia F1, the second most listened to F1 podcast in the whole world, Soccer Today, live radio shows like Open Lines After Dark, MLS Postgame Show, Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast, Off the Woodworks, and much, much more. All that on the Sports Podcasting Network.com.
Is it ironic that I completely fuel my podcasting about talking about elite athletes by drinking an enormous amount of Diet Pepsi? Is that ironic? I don't know.
If they're not an Olympic sponsor, right?
Well, they're also, it's not particularly healthy, I don't think. But anyway, Jonathan, let's move our attention to the Olympics and to the U.S. women's national team, who did get the 2-0 win over New Zealand to open the tournament up. We'll start with that game. Thoughts on it? What how you expected it to go?
Business taken care of is about the easiest way that I would reflect on it. I think it's especially important that Alex Morgan scored for the United States. As much hype as there's been around their young players like Tobin Heath and Kristen Press and Crystal Dunn and Mallory Pugh, Morgan is the leader of the line, and she has grown this year. She's worked really hard at it. She has grown into playing as a lone striker. And she's scoring. She's got confidence. She's got the finishing touch, and she's gotten used to being in that position up there alone instead of in a partnership. It's paying off. And now comes what I think could be, certainly in the group stage, the best game of these Olympics, and perhaps of the whole thing, depending on how the knockout stages play out. This is going to be a must-watch game on Saturday for soccer fans between the United States and France. And I say soccer fans, not just women's soccer fans, because these are the two best teams in women's soccer in terms of technical skill. They both are very entertaining. They want to score goals. They've got lots of stars, and I'm really excited.
France is one of the most beautiful teams to watch in the world of soccer. You're right. Absolutely. And the U.S., obviously, the massive success. Jonathan, I'm wondering whether we're finally seeing Jill Ellis's team as opposed to Jill Ellis's team influenced by Abby Wambach.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. And that is shown in a couple of ways. One, the increased level of technical skill over the last year since the World Cup. And the other is the introduction of these young players like Mallory Pugh, Lindsey Horan, et cetera. Mallory Pugh is 18 years old. It has been a long time since there's been an 18-year-old starting on a regular basis for the U.S. women's national team, especially in sort of the modern era when all of the big-name players have been transcendent stars, And this is the big test on Saturday against players like Amandine Henry, who they all know very well now because she plays in Portland. Eugenia Lasame, Louisa Nassib. I've been trying to compile an Olympics TV schedule for the Canadian audience, as folks know.
Good luck.
Yeah.
CBC.ca.
Yeah, that's
the U.S.-France game is on RDS. I don't know what it's on in English yet, but folks, watch it. It's going to be really good.
It will. You're absolutely right. And it is hard to watch. It's going to be on most of it on CBC.ca, unfortunately. But yeah, Jonathan, when you're looking at the tournament as a whole, yesterday on the show, we highlighted 4 teams that had a lot of potential after day 1 of competition in the women's soccer tournament. The United States, of course, France, Brazil, Canada. Which one of those 4 has impressed you the most after one day?
Canada upsetting Australia, impressed me a lot. Because I do think it was an upset.
Yeah, it was.
if I'd been around to give a Wood medal, I would have given it to Australia's defense. It was really bad, especially in the second goal.
Well, the keeper as well, yeah.
and that was surprising. I mean, look, Australia's got quite a bit of firepower in players like Sam Kerr and Kaya Simon. And there's no polite way for me to say this, so I'm going to say it impolitely and get in trouble with your audience. But I've gotten in trouble with your audience enough at this point, so I think I can get away with it. Remember how 4 years ago we all thought the gap between the United States and Canada was closing?
So, okay, sure. For one game, yeah. Most people did. You're right.
It's wide open now.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And that's why I was so surprised at how Canada played and the fact that they beat Australia, which has a pretty fluid attack, in the way that they did. And now all of a sudden, whereas I thought that it might be the U.S. and Canada in the quarterfinals, I believe, the way the third place seedings might have shaken out, now Australia is on the hot seat. And what they do against Germany is going to be pretty fascinating. I don't know whether they're going to be able to steal a draw or not. All of a sudden, we might be looking at a U.S.-Australia quarterfinal.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, a U.S.-Australia quarterfinal. No, yeah, absolutely. But Australia, you mentioned, lost to Canada. It was an upset. Yes, it was. Any team out there that could produce an upset, in your opinion, what's the next one? Can Brazil come out of nowhere and win this tournament? Yes, they're top of the world, but nobody's expecting them. Can Germany flounder in this tournament and not necessarily achieve the result that we all expect them to be? Who's a surprise going forward, in your opinion, Jonathan?
It could well be Brazil. I mean, you can't dispute their home field advantage, even though the Brazilian public really doesn't seem to care, so that negates some of it. I'm looking at Sweden, and I keep wondering when they're going to finally put the pieces together. They were arguably the biggest disappointment last summer, and they only barely beat South Africa. And I think that by virtue of winning a game, they will probably make it to the knockout stages. And then I don't know what happens from there. I'm surprised, and not in a good way. Maybe I shouldn't be, but you'd like to think that Pia Sundhage coaching this team with the talent that it has would be a lot better. I want to see what happens when Colombia plays New Zealand. They got thumped by France 4-0. Colombia did, and they've got some talent on that team. Even though Ureli Rincon isn't there, they've still got Lady Andrade. They've still got a few others. Like Natalia Gaitan, their captain, who I think is a pretty good player. But it's clear that everything that has been going on with them in terms of the pay disputes that they've had and not being able to train together enough is starting to wear on them, and it's really too bad because they've got some talent and some potential. I think watching them in terms of what they're going to do next against New Zealand, I'm watching Sweden to see what happens when they play Brazil on Saturday night. And then let's see here. Then you got, it's going to come down to Canada. I'm watching, Australia, Germany on Saturday. Those are the games I'm watching.
Yeah, Jonathan, you mentioned Pia, her struggles to make Sweden the way that they used to be. Norway's not even there with Pellerud. Christine Sinclair has redefined herself, more of a false nine, more of a playmaker now instead of that straight ahead, burst through scorer. Abby's retired. Are we in a transition of the women's game to something that's a lot more technical and a lot less physical?
Sure seems so. It's been a long time coming. And I think a major reason for that is the growth of infrastructure in Europe in particular. When you look at the money that's being put into teams in Germany and France and England, obviously the Swedish teams were already there. But there's better coaching. There's better technical influence. You look at it, Paris Saint-Germain, for example. They want their women's team to play with some style. And so they've got some big-time players there. You look at what's going on in the NWSL now with the Portland Thorns leading the way. That Thorns team I'm sure there's some of your listeners who watch it anyway because we're all soccer nuts who listen to this show. But if there's anybody out there who doesn't watch the National Women's Soccer League, all the games are free on YouTube. They're broadcast all over the world free of charge that way. Pick one, especially a Thorns home game where they get 16 or 17,000 fans every week and have a supporters club that's just as boisterous as what the Timbers have. And they've got some really good players on that team. Not only Christine Sinclair, but Megan Klingenberg and Lindsay Horan and Amandine Henry. And you're seeing with that, the technical level of the NWSL is rising. And that is helping because if we're honest, you know, when the tide rises in the U.S. with women's soccer, it does a lot to lift a lot of other boats around the world.
Fair enough. And the NWSL is key to the future of the sport, I would suggest as well. Jonathan, to me, it's the U.S.'s tournament to lose in absolute every way. I like France. I have always liked France, but I do think the U.S. has to be the favorite there. Tell me why the U.S. won't win this tournament, though.
I'll tell you Saturday if they don't beat France. I think France and Brazil are the two teams capable of beating them. I'm not convinced that Germany is. I think that Germany, you know, losing Celia Sasic did not help. And they've got a team that's starting to get old. You know, Anja Mittag's 31. Lena Gosling's 30. Alexandra Pop is 25. But Morozen's 24, which is nice. But they're not quite what they were last year. And if they play France this time around, I think France is probably going to beat them. And then we'll see what happens. I think that France and Brazil are the two teams in this tournament that can beat the United States. It would be obviously an upset either way, but France has the technical quality, and Brazil, maybe it's by some fluke of home field advantage or who knows what.
Yeah.
But what sets the United States apart this time around, and we talked a minute ago about Jill Ellis's influence, and this is where you see it. It is in the improved technical quality all around the field. Lindsay Horan, Morgan Bryan, Alex Morgan, Kristen Press, Tobin Heath. This is a team that has so much skill on its team that it could take the gamble of bringing Megan Rapinoe to the tournament, even though she isn't fully recovered yet. And I think, by the way, that people are dramatically underrating what Rapinoe can bring to this team, even in the knockout rounds. Because only Heath, of the American players of the current era, can match her technical quality. And I really think that Rapinoe is going to do something big in this tournament that will help the U.S. win it all.
Well, one of the greatest women players of all time, so it's hard to ignore that kind of skill and influence for sure. I want to turn our attention real quickly, just real briefly, to end the conversation on the men's side of the draw.
And another thing at the women's side real quick that I forgot.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
The reputation that Canada has carried for a while now, especially 4 years ago, is just, you know, the sort of the glorious, resolute, defending, heroic. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's getting passed by. And Jessie Fleming's a great player. Keisha Buchanan's a great player. Buchanan, I mean, everybody talking about how Buchanan's the best young defender in the world. That's wonderful. It's not enough anymore. And those of us who follow what Canada's doing in the development of the infrastructure of women's soccer in Canada have got to say that really loudly. It's not enough anymore just to have good defense.
For sure. And I cover at the grassroots in Ligue 1 Ontario, and I can tell you right now that the most talented young players in that league are sixes or defenders right now. So that probably speaks to that a bit. They're technical. They can play with the ball a lot better than they could in the past, but they still generally are at the back rather than the front. And the best players in that league, Jonathan, are still they're 24, 25-year-olds that are talented players that had NCAA careers in many cases, but they're not necessarily prospects. I wanted to, as I said, have a little bit of attention to the men in this way. What does it mean, if anything, that the U.S. has now failed to qualify 2 Olympics in a row? Is there any message to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, it means the technical director ought to be held accountable for it.
Okay.
I don't know if he will be. I don't even know whether he held his coach accountable this time around, because Andy Herzog is Jurgen Klinsmann's right-hand man. Look, it's a problem. And you know, obviously the Olympics are an under-23 tournament, et cetera, but there is an era of pretty darn talented U.S. under-23s or close to it. Jordan Morris, Emerson Hyndman, Cameron Carter-Vickers at Tottenham Hotspur, Rubio Rubin over in the Dutch league. John Brooks, I think, is 25 now, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But that Olympic team, the Olympic qualifying team, and Gideon Zelalem at Arsenal is another, Christian Pulisic, obviously Borussia Dortmund. There's no excuse for the U.S. to not be in the Olympics. None. And it's not the World Cup, I get that. But any international experience that you can get, even in a youth tournament, is priceless. And they're absolutely missing out. There's some spotlight that comes with the Olympics. There's some pressure that comes with the Olympics in a way that the under-20 tournament, for example, which is FIFA's marquee youth tournament at this point, doesn't have. But it's, as I said, there's no excuse. And the talent is absolutely there for the United States to not only be in this tournament, but I'd argue that have the talent to make a decent run at it.
Well, we saw Honduras win a game already, and Mexico looks like they're every bit the gold medal contender that they were in the last one. So certainly there's lots of talent there. I think CONCACAF gets a little underrated in this tournament as a general rule.
But they care about it. The CONCACAF nations care a lot about it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I know from this country here, there's a lot of people that are continuing to be disappointed that 3 cycles in a row they haven't been able to pull an upset on to get there, because we can understand how much it could drive the sport in terms of visibility and optics and all that sort of stuff.
That is a tough
qualifying for. Yeah, for sure.
Qualifying for the Olympics is really hard because the tournament is so small.
Yeah, and Canada has got to a game to go 3 times in a row, but they've always been, the gap in talent shows through at that level there. Certainly, we'll see what it looks like in 4 years' time. I would hope that CONCACAF maybe gets some more positions at some point, but I doubt that's going to happen because the region's just never going to get any respect until it wins.
I don't think they're expanding the tournament either. So
yeah. There you go. All right, Jonathan, we'll let you go on that note. We're having Jonathan back on 5 Rings Live sometime next week to talk about the U.S. Generally. We'll focus a lot on the women's soccer tournament at that point as well, because I know it's of interest to a lot of our listeners. But we thank you, as always, Jonathan, for taking time today. All right, let's take a break, Kevin.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 Rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
We're getting a bit of a preview, Kevin, of how tight these shows are going to have to be in the next little while. There's so much going on to try and fit it all in. It's very difficult.
Can you imagine when you have like hundreds of events going on at once?
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
We're not going to be able to hit everything. We will, as I said, we'll focus a lot in this show on the Olympic tournament. And I think because we're in North America and the Canadian and American teams, which make up the bulk of our listeners, are on the women's tournament and not in the men's, that the most of our focus on the soccer side will be on the women's tournament. However, I do endeavor to look at the men's as well. And certainly the story from yesterday was Brazil, and not in a good way. I sort of suggested in the preview for that I didn't have full confidence that they were going to get a redemption in this tournament. They didn't quite lose 7-1, Kevin, but they failed to score against South Africa. Does it mean anything?
I don't know. Group A as a whole hasn't scored a goal yet after one day of competition in the men's soccer tournament, or men's football tournament, as it is known for the Olympics. Iraq-Denmark 0-0. You know, I mentioned yesterday the possibility of Iraq creating a result. We've seen it on day one. Quite weird result in Group A. 0-0 across the board so far. Exactly. So it's going to be very interesting, Duane, especially when you're looking at Group B, 2-2 Sweden, Colombia, Nigeria, Japan. Nigeria is probably the story of the day yesterday. Have started the day early in Atlanta. We talked about earlier this week on the show they had travel problems. So they were in Atlanta in the morning, and at night they were in Brazil getting 3 points.
Yeah, and Kevin filled in for me there when I had the mute button down. Sorry about that. Anyway, like to point out my shortcomings sometimes. I'll touch on Brazil after I touch on Nigeria. That was the game, one of the best games I've seen in a major tournament in terms of excitement. I don't know how well it was played. Nigeria's that is 5-4. They scored 4 goals in about 4 minutes in the first half, in the first 10 minutes of the game. It was just insane. It was an ice hockey match rather than a soccer match. But Nigeria is the story everyone's talking about. They started the day in Atlanta. They finished the day with 3 points in Brazil. Their national anthem got screwed up by the organizers. All sorts of things, Kevin. If I could just touch on what I was trying to say when I was incompetent there for a second. Brazil, I watched a lot of that game. They were getting a lot of attack going forward. They were doing a lot of good things, but they just could not score when it mattered. And Neymar was playing a bit more withdrawn than we were used to seeing at Barcelona. I don't know whether they're going to have to make an adjustment on that and make him the primary focus forward, because certainly they were booed off the pitch. And this is a country that is getting incredibly frustrated by its football performance, although maybe they should cheer for the women because they look pretty good in their first game.
They always do this, Duane. When they bring over each player, they'll look, we'll put you deeper. Why? Just put the guy where he's going to have the most impact, no? If I was me, I'd just go up there up front by yourself and do whatever you do. And you have 100% creativity, carte blanche, you know? I wouldn't say, okay, you're going to have defensive responsibility. Why change the guy for a short period of time for a tournament? Why put more pressure on him that he already has and put him deeper? They always do this. Like, it's national teams usually all right, you're a best striker. We'll put you deeper just in case. Why?
Yeah, well, Gabriel Jesus is the player that most are looking at to be the scorer. He had an absolute sitter from the side of the goal that he hit into the post. So, he's a talented player. Let's not kid ourselves. But yeah, I don't know why Neymar is not the central focus there. He didn't play. He played pretty well. I joke about whether he's too busy in the clubs, but and I think that is a concern. But that might be a concern later in the tournament, especially if this starts to go sideways. But certainly a lot to be concerned there. Let's turn our attention to Group C. Mexico and Germany played a cracker of a game. They looked both like they're gold medal contenders. 2-2 was the score there. Either one of those teams could have won it. Neither one deserved to lose. It was a great start to the tournament. The other game in Group C,
you almost predicted a double digit. Yeah, it got that close, Duane, but quite didn't make it. 8-0 for South Korea versus Fiji.
Yeah, I watched about 10 minutes of it. Fiji held them for quite a while at 1-0, but once the floodgates opened, it became pretty clear that this was just a team that was overwhelmed by their opponent, and that was, probably the clear third place team in that group. The unfortunate thing about it is that you're going to have, especially now that Mexico and Germany have had a draw on this, those two teams are going into that game with Fiji going, we need to score more than 8 goals against them now just to be sure. And that's not
good. The floodgates will open.
Not going to be pretty for them. And it's funny, I actually turned that off at 7-0. I didn't even know it was 8-0. Anyway, 8 it was. It wasn't 8-1. So there you go. There you go. All right, speaking Honduras, Algeria. I mentioned that to Jonathan. Honduras with I don't know if it's an upset over Algeria or not, but certainly, as he said, the CONCACAF team's showing well on the first day with a 3-2 win for the Hondurans. And Portugal, hey man, when it's going well, it goes well.
So does that mean that Ronaldo is better than Messi? The fact that Portugal beat Argentina, or no?
Well, considering neither was there, I don't know. But
no, but by association.
Yes, that would be a hell of a World Cup final matchup. You said, yeah, right. Yeah, Portugal, Argentina, 2-0 there. Argentines, we mentioned the problems that they were having with federation and whether that would affect their play in this tournament. It certainly seems like it suggests that perhaps it is, Kevin. I suppose with the last 5 minutes of the show, we should take some time to look at Major League Soccer and go through a Games of the Week format for this week. This is a packed show, as I said.
Tonight, Duane, San Jose, New York City FC. It's quite becoming a tradition, New York City FC on Friday nights. Either them or Orlando quite frequently.
Yeah, and I don't think I'll be watching that. Well, it's 11 o'clock. The ceremonies might be over by then. So that's
I hope they're over. I truly hope they're over by then.
Have you seen them before? We could have a long podcast tonight.
So you're telling me that I need to go get a lot of soda to be ready.
Yeah, you might want to have a nap. Yeah. All right, San Jose, New York City FC. What's interesting about that, and I mentioned this on the follow-up of the TFC game, if NYCFC loses that game, and San Jose is pretty good at home, and TFC wins on Saturday, which they play the Revolution, third game in 8 days, it's going to be tough. But nonetheless, if that happens, TFC for the first time in franchise history after the first month of the season will be in first place. So that is, after those 10 years that or 9.5 seasons this team's had, that's quite a feat there. They're going through the rest of the Saturday schedule. The home team listed as first, as always, new DC United, Philadelphia, the new look Union. We'll see how those new players integrate. Montreal, Houston, Colorado, Vancouver, Toronto, New England. I mentioned NRSL. They're coming off the short rest week as well, but they're playing the what do you call them? The Firecrackers. Yeah, that's
Firecrackers. Yeah, probably the worst team in Major League Soccer.
All right, on Sunday, we've got Portland, Sporting Kansas City, LA Galaxy, Red Bulls in the marquee dream matchup of an MLS Cup final with the head office. Orlando and Seattle, although I think maybe it might be Galaxy NYCFC down right. It might be their dream matchup. I'm not too sure.
True. One move we didn't talk about the last few days was Nicolas Lodeiro to Seattle. Quite a debut as well for him for Seattle this week. But a player that's been rumored for a couple of clubs earlier this season in the transfer market. He was even rumored with Montreal, but nothing ever happened there. There was no discussion whatsoever. But Lodeiro for Seattle might be one of the steal or best acquisition of the transfer window that closed late Monday night. And one thing as well, I'll mention Montreal. 1 year ago today, Yohan Venegas made his debut for Montreal. He is still with the club, have decided to stay apparently with the club. So now we'll see if he actually finally able to do something with the club. He was successful with the Costa Rican national team this summer in the Gold Cup, but with the club has never been able to crack the starting 11 on a consistent basis.
And that'd be interesting to see. I think Montreal, Toronto, and NYCFC and the Red Bulls are going to be the four teams, and the Union now, obviously with their changes, are going to be battle royale in and out for the top of the East the rest of the way. So any addition there can matter. What is your game of the week from that list of this week? What interests you the most? I don't know how much I'm going to have to watch this week because of the Olympics, but what would you be watching if you could?
Colorado, Vancouver. This game is going to be important. Can Vancouver go on the road to one of the best teams in the league, if not the best team in the league, and get a result? The new look Vancouver with Giles Barnes, can he be effective on the road in his debut with Vancouver? That'll be interesting. Colorado, can they continue the streak that they have been on since early this season? And with Tim Howard as the general, can they get a big win over a potential contender in the top of the West? So that game Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern will be very interesting on TSN and MLS Live.
Yeah, the Galaxy Red Bulls, jokes aside, is a hell of a nice matchup there. Two top teams in both of the conference. I'm actually interested and intrigued in Orlando, Seattle, because of Seattle's coaching change recently. Orlando made a coaching change. It's the battle of the transition teams that in their mind are underachieving. I don't know if Orlando really is underachieving. I think they might have unrealistic expectations down there. However, that's kind of an interesting matchup for a lot of different reasons. It's also the loudest matchup in terms of the on-the-fieldness. Purple versus neon green. That's a crazy loud matchup, Kevin, if you're into colors.
That's eyesore type of matchup. Quickly, Duane, as well, the NASL. Speaking of a lot of matchup, Sunday, the New York Cosmos are facing Rayo OKC at 5 p.m. Eastern. That match will be interesting to see how Rayo OKC responds to a very tough week on the pitch.
Yeah, I will see. I mean, they've had
a good Cosmos season. Of all teams.
Yeah, they had a good season, but we'll have to get a Cosmos guest on soon, Kevin, because I don't know what they must be thinking there, whether or not they're able to meet their objectives where they are right now. I don't know. It's you think quickly. It's also clear. Another quick note. It's the anniversary of Don Garber's appointment. Obviously, it's interesting that we're talking about Don Garber, or talking about Rayo OKC and the problems of the NASL on the anniversary of Don Garber, the architect of much of what MLS is, getting his job, I think 10 years ago now, or 12 years ago now, or something.
Wow, time flies by. But quickly, Jacksonville, Carolina, Tampa Bay, Fort Lauderdale, Puerto Rico, Edmonton doing the longest travel probably in the history of sports, going to Puerto Rico. In the 11, Ottawa Fury FC, Minnesota United, Miami, and like earlier mentioned, New York Cosmos against Rayo OKC. Oh, they're in trouble on Sunday, August 7th.
All right. On that note, Kevin, I'm going to go learn about Taekwondo. And
You there?
Yeah.
And while you learn about Taekwondo, I will be wishing everybody a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com. SPN.com